Hello, my name is Lee Kirby. I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. If you're wondering where in Canada, that you'll see from the red star there that we're on the East Coast, quite a ways from Russia. We welcome this opportunity to present to you about the Wheelchair Skills Program and how we're moving research evidence into clinical practice. I'd like to express my thanks to Karine and also for the hosts of the conference and the sponsors. This is a great opportunity for us. Thank you very much. Just to set the stage, I'd like to acknowledge that the work that I'm presenting here today is the results of a large number of researchers and co-investigators that have been funded by several funding sources in Canada and the United States. The handout for this presentation will be in the form of a PDF of this PowerPoint presentation that I will send to Karine. And also most of the materials that I'm referring to can be found on our website, www.wheelchairskillsprogram.ca. I have no conflicts of interest to declare. The objectives for this session are that at the end of it, I hope you'll be able to describe the components of the Wheelchair Skills Program, that you'll be able to access the free online materials that are there, that you'll be able to summarize the research evidence supporting the Wheelchair Skills Program, and that you'd be motivated to initiate the Wheelchair Skills Program in your own settings. Wheelchairs are among the most important rehabilitation interventions. There are many benefits that are listed on the left side of this slide. Better able to get around, mobility, to participate in society, reduction of caregiver burden, and reduced likelihood of placement in a long-term care facility. However, wheelchairs are not without their problems. These include poor fit, the need for repair and maintenance on a regular basis, overuse injuries by people who use them for long term, and acute injuries, one example of which I'm going to show in a moment. In this video about to take place, the wheelchair user is attempting to get the wheelchair over a gap, and we'll just watch it twice here. Now you'll see that the spotter was in place behind the chair with a hand near the shoulder as she should have been, but was not able to react quickly enough to prevent the wheelchair user from coming out of the chair. I'm going to play this again, and you'll see that what has happened here is that the wheelchair user has attempted to pop the front wheels or the casters over the gap, but in doing so strikes the rear anti-tip devices and they spring the casters into the gap rather than beyond it, and then the person falls out of the chair. So I'll play that once again. Oops. Now this was a slow motion accident, falling out of the chair, and if it happened to an able-bodied person, there might be no injury. However, for someone who may have spent years in a wheelchair, the bones of the lower extremities are often osteoporotic and a fracture could occur. Even if the person just injured one wrist in the course of a fall like this, then if you're using your hands for transfers and to propel your chair, even a wrist sprain can be quite disabling. So in order to try and improve the benefits and to reduce the problems related to wheelchair use, better wheelchair provision is one of the techniques. The World Health Organization in 2008 released its guidelines on the provision of manual wheelchairs in less resource settings, and this sets out some guidelines for how wheelchairs should be provided optimally. Since that time, they've come out with a number of additional training packages that are freely available online, and I strongly recommend to you if you haven't seen them already. The 8 steps of the World Health Organization for service delivery are listed here. Referral and appointment, assessment, prescription, funding and ordering, product preparation, fitting, user training, and then follow-up maintenance and repairs. The Wheelchair Skills Program, the front page of which website is shown here, was established in 1996, and it deals with 2 of those 8 steps, dealing with assessment and user training in the area of wheelchair skills. We're going to deal with these 2 items. The assessment piece is the wheelchair skills test, and the training piece is the wheelchair skills training program. I'm going to be showing you screenshots of the website to help get you used to using the website. So when you open it up, there's a menu on the left side, and as you can see, I've got an arrow here beside the skills manual and forms. So if you were to click on that, you would come up with a page like this, and if you click on the one that refers to the manual, you would get a page like this. It's almost 300 pages long. It's meant as a reference, and you're welcome to use that without any charge. It's entirely free. Now let's talk about the wheelchair skills test a little bit. If we go to the forms section of the website and click on wheelchair skills test, in this case the powered wheelchair version, there's either manual wheelchairs or powered wheelchairs, and there's both an objective test and a questionnaire. We'll come back to the questionnaire in a minute. This is the example of the form that's used for the power wheelchair skills test. As you can see in the second column, there's the list of the skills. We'll show some of those coming on a little later. You'll see the next column over is the capacity. This is the score from 0 to 3, and also there's room for comments. The scoring from 0 to 3 is listed on the back side of the form. As you can see, a 3 is an advanced pass if the person carries out the skill in a highly proficient or advanced manner. A pass is a score of 2. The person carries out the skill independently and safely, but there's room for improvement due to training, for instance. A partial pass would be if the subject completes a majority of the evaluation criteria, but not all, and a fail would be if you do not complete the evaluation criteria. If the wheelchair does not have a part that is necessary for the skill, such as to be able to fold the wheelchair and it's not a folding wheelchair, then you use the score of NP for no part. So here's an example of why the comments are so important, looking at how people do the skills in addition to what they score. So this young lady has used a wheelchair for a number of years, but when she's trying to get over a soft surface, in this case the gravel, she's making the mistake of leaning forward to try and apply more force to the hand rims. In doing so, she puts more weight on the front wheels, and this is just making it more difficult for her. She does succeed in getting all the way across this gravel, so she would get a score of 2, but there's room for improvement by getting her to lean back a little bit more. Now the comments can also be used if there's some diagnostic issue. So for this gentleman, we identified that he had an amputation. He was admitted to be fitted with a prosthesis, but it didn't take very long after he was admitted for us to realize that he had another problem that we didn't see until we watched him handle his chair. And as those of you who are in clinical practice will recognize, this gentleman has Parkinsonism, and as soon as we recognized that, we realized that we needed to deal with that first. We canceled his artificial limb, got him a powered wheelchair, and they completely changed the course of his rehabilitation. Now, if we look at the pictures and videos that are available on the website, we'll come up with, if we click on that menu item, you'll come up with something that looks like this. These are videos of full wheelchair skills tests. Individual skills, like the ones I just showed, are also available there. But for the next few minutes, we're going to work our way through a complete wheelchair skills test and talk about how this person scores for that. The person in the chair in this case is an able-bodied therapist. That's why we're not using a spotter for the most part. The first skill is rolling forward a short distance. She has good technique in general, although she recovers her hands in an arc pattern back along the hand rim, so she would not get a full score for that because that would be room for improvement. The second skill is rolling backwards a short distance. You see slight fishtailing as the front of the chair wobbles from side to side, and she comes to a controlled stop as part of that. The third skill is stopping on command, whether moving forward or backward. Tell her to stop and check how long it took, how much distance it took for her to come to a complete stop, and the same moving backwards. Person doesn't know when you're going to give the command, and she stops quickly and leans forward slightly, so she gets full marks on her stops on command skill. Now, turning in place, you can see she is displaced somewhat to the side as she turns in both directions. So having turned in one direction, we center her again over the cross, and she turns in the other direction, and again she's somewhat displaced, so she's moving more with one wheel than with the other. Then we do turns while moving forward. She's moving through the pylons that are set 2 meters apart, the first two, 1.5 meters apart for the second two, and 1 meter apart for the last two. So she would get a full score on that. She does nice tight turns and doesn't displace any of the pylons. She does the same thing backwards, and she's swinging a little more widely than in the forward direction, so there's some room for improvement there. So she'd get a score of 2 rather than 3 for this skill. Next skill is maneuvering sideways, and the person in the chair has to move the chair using as little forward and backward distance as possible from a starting position over to a target and then back in the other direction. And in this case, we sort of record the number of steps that she takes to do it. I think there are 3 to 5 steps in there. Next skill, we pick up 3 objects. One, the smallest one is a coin. The medium-sized one is similar to a pen, and the largest one is similar to a cell phone. Doesn't matter which order it's done. She leans forward and doesn't orient her casters correctly. Now, this is the skill for relieving weight from the buttocks. She uses the side-leaning technique, so she has to do it in both directions and has to be able to maintain this for 15 seconds. The push-up, which used to be taught, isn't something we recommend because it's hard on the wrists if you're going to maintain it for the required 15 seconds. But she would get a full score for that. Next one is performing a level transfer from the wheelchair to a surface at the same height as the wheelchair. Because she's simulating paraplegia, she's using a sideways transfer. The errors that she makes here that reduce her score from 3 to a 2 is she leaves her feet on the footrests. Usually you like to get at least one of them off if you can. And the casters are trailing backwards rather than forwards here. But there are no tips, so that's really not a major concern, but these are things we would point out to her in training. While the person is out of the chair, we ask them to fold and unfold the wheelchair to the extent that it can be done. In this case, it's a rigid frame chair, so removing the rear wheels is part of the skill, and folding the backrest down as well. This is to make the chair small enough to be able to pass it over you into a car, for instance. And then part of the skill is also to get it back into the original situation. After the rear wheels are put on, using the quick release axles, it's important to sort of check that they're seated properly. When putting the cushion on, it's important to make sure it's back in the same orientation as it was before getting out of the chair. Getting through a hinge door, both a door that moves towards you, getting out of the way so you can open it fully, and then preferably closing it as you go through. So that would be full score for that. And then coming the opposite direction as well. So we're seeing the same skill with her from the other direction. And then opening the door and getting through it, moving away from you. Again, we see it from both directions. So she'd have a full score for this. The next skill is rolling a longer distance. This can be in a straight hallway, or as here, these are two 25-meter sections. Again, she's using the arc recovery pattern for her propulsion cycles. So she'd be marked down for that to a 2. You don't need to count the number of cycles or time it, but it's something that can be done to add more detail. She's coasting nicely between propulsions. If you don't have this amount of space, the person can go back and forth 5 times over the 10-meter distance, as we showed in the first skill. This is a slight incline, 5 degrees. She's leaning forward nicely. Using an arc recovery pattern is quite acceptable for ascending inclines. In descending inclines, she's expected to stop partway down the incline to show control and then continue without running away. We also use a steep incline. In this case, she pops her front wheels off on once, but this isn't enough for a failure because she recovers nicely. Coming down, again, she does a good job, keeps her weight back and stops partway to show control. The next skill is across a side slope, so both with the left side down and the right side down. This is a 5-degree slope that she's using here. The object is to get from one end of the slope to the other without having deviated downhill more than 10 centimeters from the starting level. You can use marks on the floor tape to indicate the space available. A soft surface, she is popping her casters nicely to move forward, but she's not keeping them up for very long, and so that would be a score of 2, a little bit of room for improvement there. Getting over this obstacle, she uses a moving approach, popping the casters nicely, but has a slight caster slap with her rear wheels hitting before her front wheels are down. And she gets over the gap as well. It gets a 3 and a 3 for that. Ascending the low curb, she uses a moving approach, popping the casters nicely. The spotting here is a little different than it is for otherwise. And she's using a simple forward roll-off for the low curb descent. For ascending a high curb, you really need to be moving for this, and she does a nice job. The person's allowed to move farther away to give them more time to build up some speed. And coming down the high curb, in this case, she's using the backward approach, which is quite acceptable. Note that she leans well forward, and once her rear wheels come down, she keeps herself moving nicely. Notice she's orienting her casters to get onto the floor so that she increases the speed the stability in the forward direction. Moves her feet off. It's very much like doing a transfer on the level in terms of what you're looking for here. She removes the cushion and sits herself on that. This has the advantages of raising your starting position and lowering your target finishing position, so making the skill a little easier. If someone uses this technique, once they're back in the chair, they need to pick the cushion up, but they don't need to have gotten the cushion back under them because that's assessed in another setting. The next skill is performing a stationary wheelie, and you can see that she succeeds. She lasts the 30 seconds that are necessary. She's a little bit hunched forward in her trunk position and a little jerky and reactive in her balancing technique. So there's some room for improvement there, so she would have a score of 2 rather than a 3. The next skill is much like turning in place, not in the wheelie position, but this time she's having some difficulty. Didn't quite get into the wheelie there. And She gets around reasonably well, but again, she's displaced to one side as she does so. You're allowed to land between your turn to the left and turn to the right, and if necessary, reposition the person over the intersection of the two green lines before starting the second one. And again, she's a little jerky and a little forward hunched here, so some room for improvement there. The next skill is rolling forward and backward into wheelie position. It's this 2 meters distance. Notice she sort of allows her knees to dip a little bit and then catches up with the wheels, but again, it's not quite as smooth as it could be, but really quite confident. But there's room for improvement. So it would be a score of 2. The next skill is coming down the high curb in the wheelie position. She declines to attempt that. She's not comfortable with attempting it, so she's given the opportunity to try it at a lower level, the 10 centimeter curb rather than the 15 centimeter, and she agrees to try that. You'll see, however, that although she gets her rear wheels down, she tips over backwards, and so she would get a 0 or a failing score for that. Next skill is descending a steep incline into wheelie position. She gets onto the incline, but then after that she tips over backwards, so she would get a 0. The next skill is getting up the stairs. So there's different ways of doing this. This is the technique that we most often recommend if the person's capable of it, which is getting out of the wheelchair and going up on the buttocks. She's got her casters nicely oriented, puts the brakes on, does essentially a sideways transfer onto the second step. You have to get yourself and your wheelchair up onto the next level, and there's different techniques for that. She's just putting the chair tipped backwards onto its push handles and leaning down on one of her hands to keep it in position as she moves up. And then she can move the chair up with her, either step by step if there are more stairs than this, or can just place it up on the platform as she's doing here. She doesn't have to get back into the chair because we've already assessed that ability in the floor to ground transfers earlier on. She could choose to come back down on her buttocks if she wanted to, or frequently we'll have people come down in the backward position, but it's their choice, the technique they wish to use. This is the final skill. And you can see she's quite accomplished in terms of her wheelchair skills and a very good trainer of people and their skills. But even for someone this accomplished, there's still some room for improvement that we've mentioned in moving through this videotape. Just moves down one stair at a time. The casters do tend to come down with a bit of noise, and if we're training people, we like to warn them about that. So that was the full wheelchair skills test. Now, I mentioned there's a questionnaire version, so that those forms are also available. Here's an example of it. You'll notice these are the same skills as we just talked about with the wheelchair skills test, but instead of there being one column to score, there's now more than one. Capacity is the same as before. Can you do the skill? The next category is confidence. How confident are you in your ability? And the third one is performance. Do you actually use this skill in everyday life? and is it a goal of training? On the back page of this form, there are the criteria, and we're not going to go through those right now, but they're available online for your interest. In addition to having just a form that the tester can fill out, we can give the questionnaire to the person who you're assessing, and it's laid out looking like this. So that, for instance, for skill number 1, regarding moving the wheelchair straight forward for a short distance, for example, along a short hallway, the next column is, can you do it? And the options are there. How confident are you? How often do you do it? Is it a training goal? So the script is available as well. Now, in addition to the scores for the individual skills that we've just talked about, you can get a total calculated score for the wheelchair skills test just for capacity, but for the wheelchair skills test questionnaire, you can get total scores for capacity, performance, or confidence. Now, if we look at what the evidence is in support of these assessment techniques, there's a section on the website that if you click up here, illustrated by the arrow, you'll find a dynamic search that has been customized by a healthcare librarian to do an immediate search of PubMed for any papers related to the wheelchair skills test or the questionnaire. And as of late August, there were 79 different papers that had either were about those two tests or that used them as outcome measures. I'll just put one up as an example. This is a recent one that we published looking at the measurement properties of the wheelchair skills test for scooters, for instance. Now, moving on to the wheelchair skills training program, the user training piece, there are two components to this: the process, how to teach, and the content, what to teach. As far as process goes, this is an example that you're going to see in a moment of training someone to get up a curb. So we break that skill down into 3 components: the approach, the popping the casters, and then leaning forward to get the rear wheels up. In this particular example here, we're segmenting the skill, which is the motor skills principle we're talking about, and we're also providing augmented feedback by the use of the mirror. So you'll see that this person, Shara Smith, is just repeatedly moving the front wheels up onto the 10 centimeters curb height to get used to how high she needs to pop the casters. So 2 different motor skills principles illustrated there. As far as the content, we looked at one way of coming down the stairs backwards in the full WST. Here's an example that we recorded when we were in Nepal a few years ago of an excellent way of coming down the stairs in the forward direction. See that he moves himself forward to get up to the edge of the curb, drops down with his rear wheels, maintains his balance, leans against the vertical portion of the stair. So 1 step at a time. This is a fairly safe way of doing it as well, if the curb has enough of a horizontal distance to work with. In addition to training for and testing for wheelchair users, we also do this for caregivers. So in this particular illustration, we're showing getting up the high curb using the caregiver approach, popping the front wheels, moving the rear wheels up against the upright, leaning the person forward, and then simply rolling the chair up the curb. Now, if we looked at what evidence there is in support of the training program, again, you'll find a dynamic link that you can use, this next one down here. And as of the end of August, there were 47 different papers available there about the wheelchair skills training program, 16 of which were randomized controlled trials, and 2 of which were meta-analyses. You're probably familiar with the evidence pyramid, that the quality of the evidence is best at the highest level there with systematic reviews and meta-analyses, and there have been 2 of those done. This one was just published recently. Is one that we had done recently on the first 13 randomized controlled trials, and I'll just show you the bottom line on that. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see the 13 randomized controlled trials listed. They're broken down here into those for experienced wheelchair users at the top and new wheelchair users at the bottom. And over on the right-hand side, you'll see the forest plot, so-called, And just focus on the one, this diamond-shaped thing at the bottom. If it's to the right of the upright line, it means that there is evidence in support of using this program for experienced users. However, the greatest effect is down here in the new wheelchair users. There's a much greater effect, and the overall effect, if you combine the two, is shown down here. Now, in addition to looking at the quality of the evidence, Kirkpatrick has also created a means of looking at the levels of evidence that look at the peak there is the impact that an intervention like wheelchair skills training can have. And I'll just give one. There's been a number of papers published about that, but I'll just give one example. Overall, we believe that the wheelchair skills program is low tech, as you can see already, but does have high impact. There was a phrase that was given to us by this gentleman from the World Health Organization a few years ago. In terms of that impact, we've done this type of training in low resource settings and high resource settings in various places around the world that are shown in this graphic. And our website has been used as of the end of August by over 100,000 unique users from 186 countries, and you can see there are people in Russia who have been using the website. But this paper that was just published in the last month, I think is probably the clearest evidence that we have the training has a positive impact, and I'll just go through a couple of figures with that. You can't read the items over on the left side here, but those are 13 different services along the lines of the World Health Organization. Was the person assessed in their chair? Were they measured for their chair and so forth? And across the top here, there are some positive impacts: daily wheelchair use, outdoor and assisted wheelchair use, high performance of ADLs or activities of daily living, absence of serious falls. And this is a composite of all of those. So if you just look down on this side, anything that's to the right of the vertical line, there's evidence for that service being helpful. Some services were not found to be helpful. And overall, the total effect of all the services on all of the outcomes was a positive one. If you look at which one of these was the single most positive, it's this one here. And if we go back over to this side, did the provider provide training for the person in the chair? So this is some evidence that training does have a positive impact on a number of outcomes. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. Just to return to our objectives, can you describe the components of the Wheelchair Skills Program, the Wheelchair Skills Test, and the Wheelchair Skills Training Program? Do you know how to access the free online materials? I think I've given a little bit of an example of how you can use our website to find all of these materials. Can you summarize the research evidence for the Wheelchair Skills Program? Well, for the assessment pieces, there's 79 papers that deal with that, quite a bit of evidence. And for the Wheelchair Skills Training Program, there are 47 papers, 16 randomized controlled trials, and 2 meta-analyses. Are you motivated to initiate the Wheelchair Skills Program in your own settings? I hope that you are, and I've appreciated the opportunity to share this program with you today. Unfortunately, I'm not there with you to be able to answer any questions, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to correspond with me by email, and my email address is there, kirby@dal.ca. Thank you very much.